Welcome to this video about the Enphase system that I've got installed at my property. I'm going to be giving you a detailed overview of the various components in the system and then walk you through their web portal and walk you through the iOS app. It's going to be quite a long video, but I'll do my best to keep it as brief as possible. Feel free to use the chapter markers if you want to skip forward. First thing, of course, is the disclaimer. I'm just sharing this information for educational purposes. If you are considering getting this equipment, please make sure you seek professional advice first. All right, so in my array, there are basically only two components relating to Enphase. So the first thing that you need is a microinverter. So the microinverter goes on your roof or wherever you're going to keep your solar panels, and you need one of these microinverters per solar panel. Okay, they are mounted directly behind or underneath the solar panel on your roof, and then they're all connected together in a kind of usual way, and they come into the house wherever you're going to keep all of your other equipment. The other component that you need is the Enphase Envoy communications gateway. So what happens is all of the microinverters communicate with this gateway, and this gateway aggregates the data and then sends it to the cloud, and that is how you're then able to consume it via their web portal and consume it via their app. You need to have one of these in order to use the microinverter system, by my understanding. So for example, if you were going to have 10 solar panels, what you would need is 10 microinverters and one of these communications gateways. If you're going to have 20 solar panels, you would need 20 microinverters and one of these communications gateways as a minimum. And that's just dependent on where you're going to locate everything. It might mean you need more of these gateways if you can't locate everything kind of close together. So it's a pretty kind of small device. It's about the size of an A5 sheet of paper, roughly, a bit smaller than a normal sized iPad. And this is it. It's blank. There's no screen. Nothing happens with it. It just works. So what I'm going to do is open the flap so you can have a look at the wiring, and then I'll explain how it all kind of comes together. Okay, so what happens is all of your power from the panels on the roof go via your microinverters. They then come together in a junction box which is just out of shot. It goes through an isolator, and then the cable comes here. And you can see that we've got the neutral wire and we've got the live wire in the first two terminals there, based on this diagram here, neutral and live 1. It looks like the system can handle live 2 and live 3, as in if you've got a 3-phase system, this will probably work. That's all there is on that big terminal block on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side is the terminal blocks for where your CT clamps go. So you can see that I've got 4 cables, so that means I've got 2 CT clamps plugged in. There is a white cable there and a blue one behind. The colours don't really matter, it's just however it comes. But those 2 cables are connected into the first 2 terminals, which is the production CT, and it's in L1 on both rows. There is a second pair, there's a twisted pair here. So I think what my installer has done is just doubled up the wire to make a better connection. So I've got a brown twisted pair in the 4th connector, and I've got a blue and white twisted pair in the 4th connector on the bottom row. So that means it's a consumption CT, also in L1 on both rows. So that matches up with kind of what I see, because just off the picture here, I have a production CT which is attached to the cable just after the isolator. So as that travels, that cable's traveling along in this ducting and coming up here. And then there's a second CT which this twisted pair is connected to, which is by my fuse box. It's measuring the grid. It's the grid CT, so it's measuring import and export to and from the grid. That's basically it. You can see there's provision for additional production CT clamps. So if you had arrays which kind of don't come together in a single junction box for whatever reason, you could still get additional CTs and plug them in here and it would work. And likewise for consumption, if for whatever reason you wanted to track things separately. It seems to have the provision, although on the Enphase kind of website, when you try to inquire about how to do this, it doesn't seem that they allow you to do so. Okay, the only other thing to mention here is there is a resistor between terminal 1 and 3 on the bottom row. So that is 0 and 2, sorry, in this diagram. I don't know what that's for. It's probably some communication thing. Okay, so that's all there is underneath. And the last thing to talk about then is what these lights are. So the light at the very top indicates if there is connectivity to the Enphase cloud. The second light indicates if there's connectivity to your mobile app. The button, this one over here, if you needed to repair the Enphase to your Wi-Fi, you would press that button, follow their instructions to get it connected up. The third light here is just confirming that it's got power. You could see earlier on in the video that that was red, so there's obviously a kind of a blip or the power's unstable or something, but you can see it's gone back to green by itself. And then the last light is there just to show it's communicating properly with the various microinverters. I don't know what this additional button does. And then finally, there's two USB ports here. I presume this is for diagnostics, in the event that you need to kind of plug in a laptop directly because it's not communicating via Wi-Fi, something like that. But that's pretty much all there is to the Enphase communications gateway. It's a very understated device. You don't have to press any buttons on it. Once it's configured, it just works and you leave it alone. Everything else that you might want to do with the system is done via the app. So once your installer has got all of your hardware set up, they will go back to the office and do a bit of admin to get your account set up and working for you. And in my case, a couple of days later, they sent me the credentials to log into the web portal. So first of all, you have to sign up for Enlighten. So you go to enlighten.enphaseenergy.com, sign up and create yourself an account, and then log in. So let me do that. You'll need to pair your system with the kind of credentials that your installer gave you. But once you've got that, this is the home screen that you're presented with. So let me orientate you. At the top left, you've got the Enphase logo. There's 3 tabs: status, energy, and array. And on the right hand side, you've got a notification bell, a help chat thing, and the hamburger menu, which I'll take you through. The main portion of the screen that you see here, on the top left, it's got the latest status. So my system is performing normally. I'm connected to Wi-Fi. It's the 17th of September and the data updated 12 minutes ago. Statistics for today, the latest power, as in the latest snapshot it's got, is that my combined microinverters and panels are producing 1.2 kilowatts. And today the very highest it's been is 3.3 kilowatts. Statistics overall for today, so I have imported 12.8 kilowatts from the grid, and this is because I charged the car overnight on the cheap tariff. My solar panels have so far produced 12.4 kilowatts today. My house has therefore consumed 24.3 kilowatts, and we have exported 0.9 kilowatts back to the grid. Okay, so my net import is 11.9, and therefore my energy independence is 47%. That's 12.4 divided by 24.3, 47%. On the right hand side, it's giving me the status of my devices. So it's telling me my gateway is performing normally, and it's telling me my 19 microinverters are all performing normally. And I'll take you into those menus a bit later on. It's also connected to the local weather. So today we've got pure blue skies outside, and it's 15 degrees. So if I move across to the energy tab then, so this is basically a graph showing you how energy is moving around in your house. So at the top, we've got the various filters you can use: day, week, month, year, etc. We've got the same metrics that you saw on the previous screen. So the data has been updated while we've been talking, so it's gone up a little bit. You can click on the date icon here to change the date if you wanted to. And you can click on the custom icon here to select a range of dates, which are not any of these. So if you want to put in your own specific dates. Looking at the graph then, so the blue bars that you see here on the graph represent solar production. Okay, so it adds up to 12.6 kilowatts. The orange bars represent what your house is consuming during the course of the day. Now, the thing with Enphase is, because I have a battery by Gim Energy, Enphase doesn't know that power that's being consumed by the house is actually being stored in the battery. So it just shows up as consumption by your house. And then when the battery's discharging, it shows up like nothing's going on in your house. So unfortunately, at the moment, Enphase does not have connectivity with third-party batteries. But apparently in Q4 2022, they're supposed to be releasing something which might solve that problem. So let's wait and see. All it needs is a CT clamp, which can be tied around one of the tails going to the battery, and then that's hardwired into the Enphase. This is a software update, if you ask me. It's really simple to do, and as you've seen, the Enphase communications hub has got a few spare terminals for CT clamps to be connected in. Grey bars above the 0 line represent import from the grid, and grey bars below the 0 line represent export to the grid. Okay. Each column that you see on this chart represents 15 minutes of time. However, the tooltip which pops up, which shows you that, on this bar that I'm hovering over, it produced 1.9 kilowatts, consumed 1.9 and imported 0.1. This is actually an hourly figure. So what this chart does is take your 15-minute data and multiply it by 4 and then present that number in this tooltip. It's very confusing. I can't understand why Enphase do it like this. I would much prefer just to get the 15-minute data in that tooltip as well, so it matches up. But the tooltip is on an hourly basis. However, the y-axis here, these numbers are correct. This is based on 15-minute consumption. Over on the right-hand side, then, it's got the energy independence, so we're up to 49% for today. And it's also got some statistics here to give you some appreciation of how much money you're saving. So the 12.6 kilowatts that we've produced is the equivalent of £4.40 if I was to purchase this electricity from the grid. The 25.1 kilowatts that we've consumed overall today is the equivalent of paying £8.80 from the grid. And the energy that we've imported, the 12.8 overnight, would have cost £4.50. However, Enphase does not account for having a nighttime tariff, which is cheaper. All of these calculations are done based on your peak time tariff, or whatever you configure in the settings. So the overnight energy that I pulled would have been a lot cheaper. For 12 kilowatts or 13 kilowatts at 4p is 52 pence roughly, rather than £4.50. When you look at it from a kilowatt point of view, the 12 kilowatts is the equivalent of running 10 nights with a 100-watt bulb running. We haven't yet saved a tree today, but we have produced enough power to run a fridge for 67 hours. And if you want to toggle the various bars on the graph on and off, you can use these toggles to switch things on and off to help it be more understandable. If you want to look at more data or a different time period, you can switch the toggle, and now it shows me production for the whole month of September. So it looks like we're pulling a lot from the grid. We're not getting that much sunshine this year in September compared to what we would normally get, and we're driving a lot, so we're pulling power for the car from the grid overnight. But for example, if I rewind a couple of months and take you back to like June or July, you'll see here for August, pretty much all of our consumption was from solar power. There's very small slivers of grey on the top where we're pulling power from the grid. Okay. Let's move forward and look at the data in a different perspective. So you can turn this into a heat map. And so I've got it on the monthly setting. You can see all the months of the year and every day in that month. And the brighter the colour, the more solar production we had. So you can even pinpoint, the best days were probably this one here in June, where we produced 41.6. Possibly this one we got to 42. So a dark colour like dark blue or kind of black is low production. This kind of blues that you see on my screen here are average production. And if each of your panels are doing a great job producing lots of solar, these icons will start to go green. Okay, because I have an east and a west array, my production means that only half my panels are kind of performing at a time, so I'm not going to get past blue, because the system thinks that if I've got 19 panels I should be producing more power, but in reality an east-west array means only half of those panels are doing anything at any one time. Okay, you can switch all this data to show you consumption data versus production, but keep in mind Enphase doesn't know if this is true consumption because the battery is charging up. But if you want to kind of see this data and find out when you're using power in your house to help you optimize, then these heat maps are kind of useful. Alright, if I take you now to the Array tab. So over here, I'll go back to Daily page. This is a diagram which represents how the solar panels are laid out on my roof. So on the front of my house facing east, I have an elevation and I have 8 panels in this configuration. Just next to that on the front roof, I have a different kind of elevation on my roof, and I've got space for 2 panels, and they're configured like this. So if you stood at the front of the house and looked up, this is kind of what the layout of the panels would look like. On the back of my house, it's the same thing. This is how the panels are laid out on the rear roof. So it's very easy to kind of stand outside your house, look up at your roof, and this is the layout. The numbers that you see in here are coming from the individual microinverters. So again, because we've got an individual microinverter, and when the installer set it up, they made a note of the serial number of a specific microinverter connected to a specific panel, and then they were able to take those serial numbers and lay them out in this diagram for me. So now I know exactly how much each panel is producing, whether it's doing well, whether it's not performing or underperforming, and you can see how much production we've got. Now, it is approximately lunchtime here in the UK, and so my east array, which is these ones at the top, have produced a good amount of power for today, but my west array is basically black because it's all in the shade so far, and the sun hasn't made it round to start generating. As we get to the end of the day, these ones will catch up with the ones above, and those won't produce much more. So it's really good with a microinverter system because you can see individual panel performance like this. Particularly if something is going wrong or one of them is broken, the rest will continue to work, but you can identify which one's not performing correctly. With a string inverter, you can't figure this out. It's all or nothing. You can zoom in and out, but in my case I don't need to because everything fits on one page. And on the right hand side we've got some metrics here saying today I've produced 13.26, and across the lifetime of having this for almost a year we've produced 5.4 megawatts of power. Finally, in these menus, it's got a few details here. I don't really understand what these numbers are, but basically you can see that in this array I've got 2 microinverters, in this array I've got 8, and then the one at the back I've got 9 inverters. Okay, so that's everything on the array tab. So now let me talk to you about what's in the hamburger menu. So, first page is about your system. So we've got your site details here, and this is personal information, so I've got it blurred out, but it's basically got my name, my site ID, and my home address. And on the right hand side we've got the installer's details, so their name, their address, and their contact details. I've blurred them out because I don't have my permission from my installer to share their details. And the next page then we can get to some reports. So Enphase allow you to download your data in various ways. They've got some pre-configured reports in this menu here, so daily production, recent production, etc., etc. You can configure the time period you want this data for, and you can get it emailed to yourself, downloaded, or printed out. The problem I have with this is Enphase aggregate the data themselves. And so, for example, it's great that I know I produced this much power on this day, but what I'd like to know is how much of that was produced by each individual panel, and therefore I want it on a microinverter level. Now, Enphase don't provide that granularity in any of these reports. So what I really wish they would do is provide me one single report with all of the metrics at the most granular level they can calculate it at, but in one report. Then I can take it offline and I can aggregate it myself, but at least I've got the granularity. With these reports that they've provided, the data is not stitched together, so I can't correlate this data with a different report that they provide over here because they haven't provided me enough attributes. So I wish Enphase would do that. I know you can get to that data. I know it exists because if you are able to write an API and connect to it, you can see all these kind of readings are there that are coming from the inverters, almost live readings. So it is all possible. It's just that I'm not able to write an API. It's too complicated for me, so I can't get to it. But I have kind of started to try and do it, and I've seen some of the data. All right. Then in devices menu, so I said I'd show you this. This is basically showing you details about each individual Enphase device you have in your system. So first of all, I've got the gateway at the top. So I've blurred out a few things. So I've got the serial number blurred out. Then it's got the SKU. It's confirming it's connected to the Enphase cloud, when it last checked in, what firmware version it's running. Then it's showing you the connection status. So in my case, everything's connected via Wi-Fi, but it is possible to connect it via Ethernet if you want to. And let's say you've installed the system in a remote place, like in a field. You might not have either of those options available, but you can connect it via a cell or mobile phone network instead. On the bottom of the screen, it's got individual block boxes for each individual microinverter that I've got. So you can see I'm running the IQ7 Plus, the serial number's blurred out again, the particular SKU, This particular microinverter is located on my back array. It's working the last time it checked in the firmware version. If I compare it to this one over here, this one's located on my front 2 array, so I know it's the big portion of the array on my house. So again, like I said, it helps you to identify where this is and which panel might not be performing properly if you'd run into an issue. All these traffic lights are green to indicate it's working properly, but if there was a problem, this goes red. Okay, so I won't scroll down, but this just keeps on repeating for every single microinverter that I've got. All right, next page. Let's go to the account information. So this is a lot of personal information. It's got my name, my phone number, my email address, the name of my system, etc., etc. That's all there is in here. Notifications. So over here you can configure when you want Enphase to send you emails and notifications. It's basically if the system's working or not working properly. You can configure it however you like. Going back then into access control. So this is where you can give access to different people to your Enphase system. So if you have other family members, you could put their details in here and grant them access. By default, Enphase have got access to the system to help troubleshoot if there was a problem. And at the moment, I've left it on that they can see my consumption data. The next line, which I've blurred out, is my installer. So although they've got access to the system to help me in case there's a problem, I have removed their ability to see my data. I could always add it on. Now let's say that I go to a different installer. I can add their email address in here in order to give them access to my system. Okay, and finally at the bottom, this bit that I've got blurred out, this is my API user ID. So if you do know how to write an API, you can use this to get access to the back end and kind of get your hands on raw data and do your own thing. But that's everything there is in the access control tab. So moving on into, I think we've done everything in account. So moving on to settings, all we have in settings is a couple of things regarding the unit cost. So do you want this widget, the one I explained to you on the first tab, which shows you how much money you've saved, turned on or off, and what unit price should it use to calculate? As I said, it can only have one unit price. It doesn't accommodate a day and a night tariff over here. This is very much designed for Americans who mostly have net metering over there, so it's a fixed price. It's not really adapted for other markets fully yet. Then the rest of the settings in the hamburger menu, which I'm not going to go through. Supports, if you want help, click on that. Community, if you want to go to their forums and etc. chat there, go there. If you want to see all the kind of updates to their app and what they've released, you can click on this and finally log out. So it's very simple. I use the graph on the energy tab quite a lot. I tend to do everything on the iPhone via the app because it is identical to the web portal. So I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, so I'm running an iPhone 13 mini and this is iOS 16 and this is what the Enphase app looks like today. So let me talk you through what you see here. It is very, very similar to the web portal in the layout in all of the tabs. So at the top you've got the Enphase logo, on the right hand side you've got the share button and also the question mark to seek help and support if you need it. It tells me when my system is performing normally, today's date, I'm connected to Wi-Fi, and when this data last updated. On the right hand side it's got the sun icon and the temperature outside currently. The latest power, as of 6 minutes ago, is that the combined system was producing 1.3 kilowatts of power, and the peak power that we've had today is 3.3 kilowatts. I've imported 12.8 from the grid. The system has now produced 13.4. My house has overall consumed 25.9 kilowatts, although a lot of this is going into the battery, and as I said, Enphase do not have connectivity to third-party batteries, so it looks like you've just consumed the power. And then what will happen is when the battery's discharging, Enphase will seem like you're not using any power at all in your house. Overall, my energy independence is currently 51%. That's basically 13.4 divided by 25.9. And today we've exported 0.3 kilowatts to the grid. Moving across to the energy tab. So over here we've got today's date at the top and the same filters. So we're on a daily view, but you can change that to week, month, year, or a custom time frame. You can click on the date for September and select a different date if you wanted to. The same metrics I went through are there squished at the top, and you see a graph which looks very identical to the web portal. So the blue bars on the graph represent solar production, the orange bars represent consumption by your house, and the grey bars represent your import or your export to the grid. Grey above the zero line is import, grey below the zero line is export. On the y-axis, the scale is correct. So each one of these bars, each column on this chart is 15 minutes worth of time. So you can see in the early hours I was pulling power from the grid, and I was pulling about 2.5 kilowatts every 15 minutes because I was charging the car. You can click on this and get a tooltip pop up, and similar to the web portal, the numbers that it presents are not based on the 15 minutes of the bar that you're selecting. It multiplies those numbers by 4 and presents you an hourly rate. So just like the web portal, it's a bit confusing and deceiving. I wish it was on a 15-minute basis, but I just wanted to point that out to you. So as I said, Enphase don't have connectivity to a third-party battery. So you can see, because I have a give energy system in these hours over here, the whole system reports that my house is doing nothing and I don't have any consumption or any production, nothing. It's because the battery's discharging, and Enphase have only got CT clamps on my solar production, which at that time is doing nothing, and a grid CT to measure what I'm importing or exporting. But I'm not doing anything because my battery, which is between those two, is servicing my whole house. So that's why it looks like my house didn't consume any power at that moment. It's because it's consuming the power that was charged up in the battery from the day before. Okay, you can change the time periods at the top. So just as an example, if I select monthly, then all of these metrics change to a monthly figure for the month of September so far. You can cycle back and forward if you want to, and all the charts represent, each bar on the chart now represents a day rather than a 15-minute segment. Okay, so that's everything on the energy tab. If I move forward and go to the array tab, so this is again identical to the web portal. It's got all of your solar panels laid out in the way the installer designed it, and I specifically got them to do it in this format so it represents how the panels are laid out on my roof. So the light blue that you see on the top half of this diagram are the panels on the front of my house facing east. So it's 1 p.m. when I make this recording, and the sun has kind of done all of its work on the front, and it's starting to pan round to pick up the panels at the back. So although the panels at the back of my house are kind of a dark blue, black colour, they will now start to generate and get to a similar colour as the ones above by the end of the day. You can zoom in and out if it doesn't all fit on one page, but again I got my installer to lay it out for me like this so I can look at everything at a glance and I don't have to press any buttons. You can use the date things to go back and forward or see like a whole month's worth of data if you want to, for example like this. And as I've said, this is really good for seeing individual panel performance. So if you look at my back array on the bottom half of the screen, the top right panel, which says 155 kilowatts, so this panel is affected by shading, and you can see that it's a slightly darker shade and that it's produced less than the rest. So if you really care about the data and you're interested, an Enphase system, a microinverter system, is really good for giving you this kind of information. If I had a string inverter system with all of these panels, every single panel would have been limited by the weakest link. So in my case, the weakest link is this panel, which has done 155 kilowatts only, but it means that the other panels that you see here doing 230 kilowatts or 320 kilowatts, they would have all been limited each to 155. So I would have lost loads of power out of my system because of this one panel. So that is the most significant advantage of having a microinverter system versus a string inverter system, is that you're able to capture more of your production. Now in sunnier climates like the States or Australia, this might not matter so much because your system is producing so much, you have more than you know what to do with. But in the UK, where we don't get that much sunshine, optimizing your system just to capture every little bit is gonna help, in my opinion. So that's why I went with a microinverter system. Okay, finally, let's go ahead and look at the menu. So this is very similar to what I've shown you before, all the same icons. It's got my name at the top, my site ID, which I've blurred out. If I click on the system button, again, I can click on the thing to see my site details. So I've got my name and my address blurred out, and at the bottom, it's got the installer's name and address and contact details also blurred out. Going back into reports, so again, you can download the same reports I've shown you. It's got all of those you see there to choose from. You can select the time period and then it will be emailed to you, and I've blurred out my email address at the bottom. If I go back to devices, So just like I showed you before, I can click on the gateway and it tells me what model I've got, the serial number, the SKU, when it last checked in, the firmware, that it's connected via Wi-Fi. In my case, I haven't connected it via Ethernet, so it's not available, and I haven't connected it via the mobile phone cell network, so that's grayed out. But you could do that if you wanted to. Going back and looking at the microinverters, so as I said, I've got 19 microinverters. You're going to see 19 tabs like this, scrolling all the way down. They all say IQ7 Plus because all my microinverters are the same. The serial number, which I've got blurred out, the SKU, which array that particular microinverter is on, when it last checked in, and the firmware versions. Okay, so going back out of this, if I go next into account, so this is personal information. Most of this is blurred out. It's got my name, my email address, my phone number. Scrolling down to the bottom, it just tells you what do you want to call your system, things like that. Notifications, so again, you can switch on or off various notifications depending on your personal preferences. So whether you do this via your phone or you do it via the web portal, everything is synchronized together, so it's all good. And access control, so if I want to give other people, like other family members, access to the system, I can put the details in the top section, and at the bottom section you can see that Enphase have got access to my system to help me with troubleshooting, and at the very bottom it's got the name of my installer, which I've blurred out, that they've got access to help me maintain the system. Okay, coming all the way back out then, so that was everything in system. If I go to settings now, change your gateway internet connectivity. So if you've changed your Wi-Fi, if you've got a new router and a new password, these are the instructions for how you get your Enphase to repair. As I said to you before, the currency data, so do you want that widget to show up, and what is the unit rate that you get, and if you want to have dark mode when you use it on your phone. So then support, if you're stuck and you've got problems, you can contact Enphase. Community, if you want to access the forum. App information just gives you the version history of the apps and all the various features that they've been releasing. And finally, you can log out at the bottom. So that is a crash course of the Enphase app. So it's really good. It gives you a lot of information. It's really kind of rich and helpful. I wish they would do two things. One, refresh the data more often than 15 minutes. Maybe every 5 minutes would be really good. And secondly, I wish I could get the granular data out of this without Enphase aggregating it, so then I can do my own analysis and roll it up in the way that I find interesting and helpful. So that's a whirlwind tour of my Enphase system. As I say, it's actually quite simple and very understated. You just have the microinverters, the Enphase communication hub. These components are kind of invisible once they're installed, they're just kind of tucked away, and all of your interaction with this system is basically done either via the app or the web portal. So it's very reliable. I've never had any problems with it. I've never had to call Enphase and do any kind of troubleshooting in all the time that I've had it. My installer described it as the Rolls Royce of systems because it's high quality. You get the microinverter system so you can see panel level performance, and to counter the fact that you have 19 different microinverters in my case, but they're up on my roof, so they're kind of quite inaccessible once this is done, Enphase give a 25-year warranty on their products. So the actual microinverter is kind of sealed and glued shut with some sort of waterproof seal, and there's no moving parts in it, no fans or anything like that. It's got its own heatsink built in to dissipate any heat it's making, and however they've built it, they believe it to be so reliable that you've got a 25-year guarantee on it. And if something were to break, Enphase will replace the microinverter and cover the cost of labour, including having to go up on your roof if necessary to sort the problem out. Having watched some other videos and articles, they believe their reliability is like 99.99%, that the handful of microinverters which do fail prematurely, they're happy to cover the cost of putting that right. So I think that is, a strong signal from Enphase on how much they trust the quality of their workmanship. But the deciding factor for me is because in my case I have an east-west array and I'm affected by shading. I wanted a system which either has optimizers or microinverters. So when I discussed with my installer that I'm not really interested in a string system because I'm really trying to maximize what I can get out of this, then he recommended to go straight to Enphase. and the additional money that we've spent to buy an Enphase system versus a string system, we are well over 50% of the way there in recovering that additional cost.